Hey guys, today I want to tell you about a grab-and-go bag that you can pick up at your local CALS library. Now, this grab-and-go has two activities in it. One is instructions on how to build a fairy house and the materials for building the house. The other is about how to write your own fairy tale, okay? So fairy tales are stories that often have certain elements or things in them. For example, you may have learned about setting. Setting is the place and time where a story happens, okay? So the setting of a fairy tale is often faraway lands and kingdoms, and forests feature a lot in fairy tales, okay? And then the characters, okay? Lots of times there's kings and queens and princes and princesses. So royalty is often in fairy tales. You have a lot of talking animals in fairy tales, which I love. Creatures that have magical powers and enchantment. Those often feature or happen in fairy tales. And then the plot, which is just what happens in the story. That's what plot means. The plot is often good versus bad, or enchantment and magic play a really important part in the story. One of the things that stands out a lot is that fairy tales often have things happen in threes. So if you think of like the Three Little Pigs or stories like that, something happens 3 times, or there's 3 characters, or the character tries to do something 3 times. All right, so those are some of the elements that are in fairy tales, and I wanted to read a certain book today because the character in it learns about the ingredients in fairy tales, and the book is called A Cooked Up Fairy Tale. Now, I want you to listen for fairy tale characters that you may have heard of before, because they're going to be in here, or maybe listen for some of the things I just talked about that you often see in fairy tales. So, this is A Cooked Up Fairy Tale by Penny Parker Klosterman, and it's published by Random House. Although William lived in the magical land of fairy tales, he preferred pastries to princesses, kitchens to kingdoms, and recipes to the royal reporter. William dreamed of being a chef known throughout the land. Whether sauteed, sifted, basted, or baked, pureed, poached, filleted, or flaked, William's dishes were perfect. But cooking happily ever after was a different story. He'd tried working at the brick house. You see any familiar characters there? What story is the brick house from? Okay, he's got a recipe right here. It says pot of wolf stew. Bring water to a boil, stir in 3 cups peas, 3 cups carrots, 3 cups potatoes, and 1 big bad wolf. And then over here, he'd served up porridge at 3 Bears Bistro. And this bear says, too cold. But folks there were very persnickety. And this one says, too hot. Does that remind you of any stories you've heard? And he baked for gingerbread on the go. That hadn't ended well either. They're running away. That's what gingerbread men do, right? William decided he'd better cook from home, but his pantry was almost bare. So he emptied the last few coins from his cookie jar and headed to the market. And look, he found a box. It says, to Judy, Chief of Fairy Tale Headquarters, Fairy Tale Food. Must deliver before bedtime. What's this? Asked William. Fairy tale food? Oh, it must be splendid. But it was only raw apples, beans, and a pumpkin. This isn't splendid, said William. Clearly, Fairy Tale Headquarters needs a good chef to spice things up before the bedtime delivery. So he sliced and diced, chopped and topped, and stirred and whirred. Then he packed up his delectable creations and followed the signs to Fairy Tale Headquarters. Uh-oh, who are these characters? She says, Judy, I need the apples. And he says, and I need the beans. And the mice say, the pumpkin, Judy, the pumpkin. Where can that delivery be? Asked Judy in a stew. I believe I can help, said William. May I present baked apples with caramel drizzle, bean soup with smoked ham, and pumpkin pie with cream and candied pecans. Oh, what? Why? Stammered Judy. I need shiny apples and raw beans and a whole pumpkin. Don't you know anything about fairy tales? I'm sorry, said William. I read cookbooks, not fairy tales, but maybe I could. You've cooked up enough trouble, said Judy. It's bedtime and the tales must begin. Now leave and take this book of fairy tales with you. William plopped down outside the kingdom wall and opened the book. Poisoned apple, beanstalk, pumpkin coach. Oh my, said William. Fairy tales really do have their own ingredients. He rushed back to find Judy. Did I spoil the apple story? He blurted out. Snow White? Actually, she loved your baked apples and ate every one. She was so stuffed that she fell into a deep sleep. Of course, this caused a stir with those 7 dwarfs. But then there was a passing prince and a kiss, so happily ever after. Thank goodness, said William. And the beans story? Jack and the Beanstalk? The giant said something like, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell soup and I want me some. Jack was in a pickle, but he drove a hard bargain and traded the pot of soup for the giant's castle in the clouds. Another happily ever after. Such a relief, said William. What about the pumpkin tale? Cinderella? It's still unfolding. We'll find out together. Oh no, said William. This is a recipe for disaster. See what's happening? She's writing in a pumpkin pie instead of a pumpkin. Then, slip, flip, whack, smack. Scrumptious, said the prince, simply delicious. He took another bite and said, I vow to search all the land until I find the baker of this pie. Cinderella slumped in her puddle of pumpkin. This isn't happily ever after, sighed Judy. Happily ever after, murmured William. He strode right into the fairy tale. Your Highness, I baked the pie, and I will bake you pies ever after. But may I suggest you can have your pie and your princess too? The prince gazed at Cinderella. You're a feast for my eyes, he said. Would you care to dance? My, said Judy. It looks like you've cooked up another happy ending. And from that night forward, the prince and his princess ate like kings and queens, and William cooked happily ever after. The end. Did you notice lots of fairy tale elements in that story? I thought it was a good one for that reason. All right, I want to tell you one more thing about fairy tales. I did not know that fairy tales are in a special section of the library, and I did not expect them to be where they are. I'll tell you why. You may know that there's fiction books and nonfiction books. And fiction books are made-up stories, and nonfiction books are true facts and figures, history, things about real people, real places. But you know what? That's where the fairy tales are. I'll tell you why. Fairy tales were often written a long time ago and in different places. People love stories. They always have. And reading fairy tales tells us a little bit about how the people thought and what they valued and how they lived. So when you're studying a culture, which just means people that live a certain way, it is sometimes helpful to study their stories. So that's what makes fairy tales special, and I hope you write your own fairy tale and enjoy doing it, and also your fairy house.